So really, I think our greatest asset is staying youthful. We have a concept of longevity is to live a long time. But in actual fact, you hear people talk about, I want to be 120, I want to be 150. I think Dave Asprey wants to be 180. Peter Diamandis wants to be 700. The problem for me with all of that is those numbers are completely abstract. I have no ability to relate to them. But I can relate to being young. And so what I really want to do is stay young for the rest of my life. And that's really been the focus of how we go about cracking the code on aging. And actually, it's our definition of longevity is staying young for a long time. When you think about it, most people that you talk to perceive that aging is a linear process. Every year it's another birthday. I don't feel that much different than I did before. And, it seems pretty linear. In actual fact, if I were to ask you, what are you going to be like 10 years from now? Just think about that for a minute. What are you going to be like 10 years from now? What are you going to be like 15 years from now? It's really, really hard to imagine that you're going to be much different than you are today. It's like, well, yeah, maybe I'll look a little different, whatever, but it's really hard for us to wrap our heads around the fact that aging is actually an exponential process. It's actually an exponential decline. It's not linear. And we know this intuitively. We see it all around us. We see that people in their 70s and 80s age so much more quickly than they do in their 30s and 40s, and it gets very dramatic at the end. At 88, she was driving around doing well, playing golf and having fun. And at 92, the wheels had completely come off. And, she's lying in a bed and passes away at 93. And you see this all the time. And yet we don't relate to it as that's going to actually happen to us. So this is one of the biggest takeaways to start with, is that aging is actually an exponential process, which means that it's an exponential game that we're playing, not a linear game. And so many of our approaches are focused on a linear response to an exponential problem. So this is some data from Stanford that was published, looking at the way that proteins associated with aging peak as we go through life. And what we can deduce from this is that youth is really over at about age 26. And after that, we really start in earnest the aging process. And you can see that there's a peak in the aging process here at age 34. So in our late 20s, early 30s, we're starting to age pretty significantly. And this is cumulative. It doesn't mean that we stop aging or we go back in time. It just means that these proteins don't accumulate as quickly. There's another peak at age 60, but then look at what happens between about 63 and 78, right? There's 15 years here between 63 and 78. This is a massive, massive influx of aging that occurs for us. And yet we kind of go through this whole concept that aging's linear. And so, what I did in my 40s is going to work for me in my 60s. And this is a real misconception because we don't really understand the game that we're playing, or the game that our patients are playing, right? So we're stuck in a mindset of, well, I know how to fix that. It worked when they were 30, 40, 50, and it should work now, but it doesn't seem to be working as well. Why isn't it working as well? Well, this is the reason it's not working as well. You have a completely different patient at this point in life than you do back here. And you have a different patient at 34 than you do at 27. And you have a different patient at 60 than you do here. And you intuitively know this, but I want to show you this, just how dramatic this change is. And so the interesting thing about life itself and what your clients and yourself are really interested in is making an impact in the world. And our impact, our ability to make an impact on the world goes up exponentially with every decade. So I would imagine that for most of you, each decade of your life, if you look back, you probably accomplished more in the current decade than you did potentially in all the other prior decades put together. And this is the trajectory that's really fun in life, right? I mean, making an impact. And I mean, not only an impact in business, but an impact with regards to your family, with regards to your communities, with regards to your families, the things you're passionate about. And And this is really what happens. And then what happens is when these lines intersect, our impact goes on for a while, but our impact then craters. And this is really what everyone fears, right? I don't fear death myself. Death is not really the enemy to me. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, that's okay. I can make peace with that, right? What I fear is decline. What I fear is ending up in a nursing home. What I fear is actually moving from actually being vital and making an impact on the world to becoming irrelevant, to where people only want to come and visit me just to be nice to me. And I think that's the fate that none of us actually want to have. So in our world, this is what we're working for. We're working to take people back in time to make them young again. And I'm going to show you how we're thinking of doing that. This is playing the symphony of longevity I was referring to. And the Life Raft here, this is an acronym for a trial, an IRB-approved trial that we're running right now, which is our first attempt at writing and playing the symphony of longevity. And I'll show you this in more detail. But the impact of this, when you are able to stay young for a long period of time, your ability to have an exponential impact continues to grow. And so the time, attention, and resources that people invest into staying youthful, maintaining their youthfulness, basically pays off 100 times over, maybe even more than that. And I think you can see that this is a much different paradigm of living than we're used to. We're so used to the other paradigm where it's like, oh, you're 60, well, you should be slowing down. Oh, you're 65, you should probably retire. Oh, you're 70 and you're still skiing, you probably shouldn't be doing that. You're on a mountain bike, oh, you definitely shouldn't be doing that. And so we have all of this cultural messaging that comes into us that has actually normalized the aging process. And we as physicians have to be very, very careful to realize that we don't want to get caught up in that thought process. If we're really going to make an impact for our people, the patients and clients that we work with, we need to think differently. And that's what I'm going to show you how I've gone about doing this. So I also think that staying youthful is the currency of exponential impact, just like the slide just showed. And I find that in the clients that we work with that are business owners and entrepreneurs and people of this nature that can come in and do the kinds of things that we're doing, this is really what they want. They want to continue to make an impact. I was having lunch with a mentor of mine back in September, actually, in Miami at a conference. And he was saying, he coaches entrepreneurs, and he was saying, you know, people that are millionaires, entrepreneurs that are millionaires, they're thinking about, how do I make the next million? How do I improve my business performance? But when he coaches billionaires, what they're focused on is, how do I make an impact? How do I make a bigger impact? And really, when you step away from all of this, it's impact that we really, really want to make. So in my world, I've come to understand that there are three different types of medicine. There's symptom-driven medicine. My background's interventional cardiology, and I practiced that for 25 years, and I'll show you some elements of that. But the medicine that I was taught is symptom-driven. And if I were to ask you, you know, did you see your doctor today? No, I felt fine. Why would I see my doctor? It's really all symptom-driven. And then there's root cause medicine, which is functional medicine, which I've also been trained in, and many of you have been trained in. And root cause medicine is great because it's actually trying to get at the root cause. Okay, well, what is the cause of the eczema? All right, is it your leaky gut? Is it your food sensitivities? I mean, what's actually causing it, right? What's causing the atherosclerosis? We're going to get to the root cause of it. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I'll show you my own story that I made great use of this to crack the code for what was happening to me as I started going through the aging process. And yet there is another layer of medicine that basically is at the foundational bedrock, which is longevity medicine, right? Could be called longevity medicine or youthful medicine. And the reason that this is so important is because it's at this point where we're actually addressing the drivers of aging. Symptom-driven medicine addresses the symptoms. Root cause medicine addresses the root cause of those symptoms. But longevity medicine addresses the drivers of aging. And so if you have a solution for somebody with a root cause, a functional approach, that's going to work for a period of time. But because aging is continuing, that solution is going to run its course, and people will continue to age, continue to have new problems or a recurrence of the old problem. The same is true here. So it really, what I want to do also, and I'm passionate about this, is actually change the way we even think about medicine. That medicine should be practiced from the foundational floor up. We should be focusing on the drivers of aging at the same time that we're focused on the root causes, at the same time that we're alleviating the symptoms. And this is my concept for a new paradigm of medicine, is to use all three of these in that fashion. So what is it that people want? Well, when I talk to my clients, they want mental clarity. They want a good memory. They want to be creative. They want to reduce stress. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more. And they want to have stress elimination if possible. They want to look good. They want to have physical capability and athletic performance. They want their libido and they want sexual performance, whether they're male or female. And then they want to be healthy. And they want longevity, but only if they're healthy. And they really want to have great relationships. And then they want to have confidence that they're not going to get hit by a bus, that they're not going to get hit by something that they weren't seeing. And so how many times, as a cardiologist, had I heard, well, my friend had a stress test 3 weeks ago and then just had a massive heart attack. The stress test looked normal, by the way, but he just had a massive heart attack. Or, I just saw my doctor. I got all my cancer markers screened for and everything was fine. And then 3 months later, she was just diagnosed with stage 2B breast cancer, or, he just was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer. So we have these buses that can take us out, and we need to be preemptive in the way we think about that. So who am I? Well, that's a picture of me not too long ago. I'm an athlete. I'm a mountain biker. I played soccer and basketball in high school. I played a bit of soccer in college until my chemistry labs got in the way of practice, and I couldn't keep it up. But I did play a little intramural basketball, and I've always been athletic in the sense that I've loved to run. I started body surfing when I was a kid. I love the ocean. I do stand-up paddle. I also picked up skiing as a college student from my roommate. And then at age 45, my son introduced me to snowboarding and said, "Dad, you got to try this." We were playing around with skateboards and he said, "Dad, you got to try this." And so I had tried it once before and I got so beat up. I felt like an NFL football quarterback that had, no front line basically. So I put on all the gear that I had I'd gotten into motorcycling, dirt bikes and things like that. I put on all my safety gear and went out to learn how to snowboard, and got really good at it, to the point where we're doing heli trips and snowcat trips and skiing through the trees and powder and everything else. So I love being outside. I love being kinetic. I love being in nature. And this is really a part of who I am. So interventional cardiology, this is a cath lab. And I built these, I designed them. I did lots of things in this space. I'll show you a little bit of that. But this is a heart attack. This is an LAD that's totally occluded. We would go in, as you know, thread a little guide wire down here, open it up, use some clot dissolving medications, and then place a stent. And I love that work. I loved everything about it. I ended up building my own heart group called Advanced Heart Care, which is still, even though I left the group 10 years ago, is still functioning and doing well. And I started it myself. I built it up to 10 offices. We had 10 offices and 12 doctors. We had electrophysiologists, interventionalists, non-interventionalists. And we flew around in a little A36 Bonanza to get to Southeast Oklahoma and East Texas to service smaller communities. And I really had a passion for trying to bring higher levels of care to people that couldn't access it. I realized that if you're in the city, you have access to good care. And even that varies between hospitals, of course, as you know. But my passion was to try to allow these people to have better care. So we ended up building the group. And then I also co-founded a heart hospital in Plano, Texas, with another cardiologist and the people at Baylor. And at this point in time, we were asking a different question. We were tired of the kind of treatment that cardiology patients and their families were getting in the normal hospital settings. And I'll never forget, I worked with a large hospital. I'm not going to name any names here, but I worked with a large hospital system here in Dallas for 2.5 years in meetings around trying to build a cardiovascular center of excellence, a heart hospital, if you will. And after 2.5 years, they came back and said, we've decided that it's just not in our priorities right now to do this. And I was just dumbfounded. I was like, okay, never again, never again. I'm not going to invest all this time into an organization that really can't see, what they should be doing. So we started to do it on our own. And we were actually going to build the heart hospital ourselves, myself and this other cardiologist. And then I had a good relationship with Baylor at that point in time. And I reached out to them and they were super interested to help us with it. And so that's how this got started. Another interesting fact is that this was being done back in the early 2000s, and there was a moratorium that came out while we were in the middle of this, that no more physician-owned hospitals could be built. So there were about 26 projects in the U.S. That were under construction at that point in time, and we were the only one that actually survived that moratorium. And the reason we were able to do that is because we had a vision for, the moratorium is going to burn off. And we're going to make this through, and we're just going to keep holding our meetings and refining our process and this kind of thing. And it worked out. So it's a beautiful facility, and it really provides a tremendous standard of care. But my only relationship to it right now is when I give lectures to the cardiac rehab patients on how not to ever need to use the hospital again. I really try to keep people out of there as much as possible. So I'm also involved with medical device companies. I got involved with several medical device companies. I sit on the board of a couple of them. This is one, Scientia, which works in a neurovascular space with some novel technology and guide wires and catheters and things like that. It's taking off, doing very well. There's a sister company that's being acquired by the parent company right now. And I'm also involved in some pharma startups and some other things. So I kind of have an entrepreneurial spirit, just so you know. And I'm doing all these different things, but then I got sick and I started putting on weight. I felt tired and exhausted. When I would come under stress, I would get anxious and depressed, and I was developing brain fog. So my dad died with dementia. So here I am, I'm in my early 50s, and I'm starting to wonder, what is happening to me? And I'll tell you this, when I got into my 40s, remember I played soccer in college, right? I could run all day. I got into my 40s and I decided that I needed to get back in better shape. So I went out and went for a run, and I could run 2 blocks and I had to stop. And I thought, wow, I have really leveraged my health for the sake of building this practice and building the family. And I think this is something that professionals do, we do as physicians, but also the people we take care of do it. We leverage our health for the sake of building our practices, we'll call it, and our families, whatever those might be. And then we try to get it back. So anyway, I thought this is terrible. So I started building exercise back into my daily routine. I started riding a bike to work. I started taking the stairs. I started going for bike rides on the weekend, going for runs. And sure enough, in about 3 months, I could go run 3 miles and I felt better. I was eating better, sleeping better. And that was all fine and good. But then in my 50s, that no longer worked, right? And this is another take-home message. What you're doing in your 30s or 40s, it's not going to work in your 50s. What you do in your 50s is not going to work in your 60s. What you do in your 60s is not going to work in your 70s. I showed you the protein curves. You are playing an exponential game. And if you don't have an exponential strategy, then you're going to lose. So basically, I threw myself into functional medicine and things. But before that, I actually got tested, and I had quote unquote comprehensive testing, which all of us would think was pretty rudimentary. And I was basically told, hey, your results are normal for your age. You're just getting older. And why don't you take an antidepressant? So I have to tell you that for me, that was maybe the most existential moment of my life. Well, maybe not the most, but it was certainly up in the top 5. And I couldn't believe that I'd reached the zenith of my life, that it was just going to be downhill from here. I had a lot going on. I loved all the stuff I was involved in. And it was like, I don't want to go down that glide path. So that's when I threw myself into functional medicine, integrative medicine, age management medicine, got certifications, et cetera. And after 2.5 years, I cracked the code for myself as to what was going on. And some of you might imagine what was going on. I had subclinical hypothyroidism that was only diagnosed by biometric testing. My genetics were such, my methylation cycle genetics were such that I don't make certain neurotransmitters very efficiently. And consequently, once I got on the right supplements, that changed. Once I got on the right combination of T3 and T4, and oh, by the way, my DIO2 genetics are such that I don't convert inactive T4 to active T3 in my brain very efficiently. So I'm homozygous for a defect there. And the weight gain and things like that, I was getting hormonally depleted, testosterone, DHEA, some of the usual things. But once I got those things organized, I started to feel great again. I really started to feel great again. And so I started to ask myself, gosh, I wonder how good I can be. And I had always heard this from my grandmother, Jeff, it's hell to get old. You don't ever want to get old. I heard this from a young age all the way through. And here I was facing it for really the first time in my life. And so putting that together with the fact that I had been able to crack the code for myself and get myself back to feeling very youthful, I thought, okay, this is the direction I need to go. And I also began to realize that the questions that we ask are infinitely more powerful than the answers that we currently have. So what I've found is that for many physicians, and it could be attorneys, it could be accountants, it could be anybody, but I see this in physicians all the time, that they get trained in a particular way. We all went to good medical schools. We did well in class. I was AOA, et cetera, right? We all did well at what we did. But the point is that we come away and we've basically been trained and we get married to a set of answers. We get married to that toolkit. And if I had just stayed married to that toolkit and married to the answers that my peers had for me, I would just go down the aging process like everybody else. It's only when I started asking different questions. And so when I started to feel really good again, I started to wonder, geez, I wonder how good I can be. I wonder how fit, how strong, how mentally sharp. And that was really a trigger for me. And I really, at that point, wanted to leave the whole sick care world and go into healthcare. And so many of you have done this. I know this is a common thread for all of us. We share this, right? We really do want to optimize healthcare, and we want to be preemptive, et cetera. So we all have this in common. So the question, how good can we be, became like a mantra for me. It became really the focus of the practice. And then we added another question to it. How do we make 100 the new 30? So I think, again, when you think about all the people that you saw that were 100 years old or 110 years old or 120 years old, I see pictures of those people, right? And it's like, boy, that's not exactly what I'm going for. But I know what it's like to be young, and I want to stay young. And so that's how we go about it. That's how we go about thinking about it. And the last question that we ask is, how do we live well beyond 120? How do we break the Hayflick limit, right? And I have a podcast called the Gladden Longevity Podcast, where we go into all these things in tremendous detail if you're interested in that. But basically, we have discovered literally thousands of answers, and I know you have too, thousands of answers that you didn't have before. I would just encourage you to not get married to any of them, because I'm not married to any of the answers we currently have. I'm only married to these questions. Any answer will have a shelf life, right? It will only last for a period of time. Something better will come along, something new, some additional insight, whatever it is, some amalgamation of things will start to work better. And I think it's so important to remain curious, incredibly curious, and be married to your questions. Figure out what your questions are and get married to those questions, and don't get married to your current answers or your training for that matter. And I will just say this about that. When I was a cardiologist, I wasn't really married to my training. We were constantly innovating. We were constantly doing new things in the cath lab, looking for better ways to take care of our patients. So when it comes to longevity medicine, I've created an avatar that encapsulates how I think about longevity medicine. And it took me a while to come up with this, quite honestly. And the reason that was so critical for me is because when you think about longevity medicine, there's a lot of shiny objects out there, right? Oh, it's all about stem cells. No, it's all about NAD. It's all about NMN. Oh, no, we need ozone. Oh, I'm using exosomes and I'm using peptides and I'm mixing this stuff together. And it's like there's all these shiny I've got the right supplement now, right? Urolithin A, that's the one that's going to save everybody. So, we all have these shiny objects that we get married to. And in actual fact, what I wanted was a structure that actually would hold this information together. So the things that go into this will change over time, right? The tests that we do, the levers we've identified, etc., the actions that we take, those will change over time. But I see this as being a durable structure in terms of how we think. So I use this to coach our clients. I use this to train the physicians I work with and the staff I work with. I use it to actually explain to clients what we do by going through this. And so it starts on this first level here, this foundational science level, where we're constantly sourcing new information and feeding it into these 4 circles. And there's 4 circles that we've identified: life, energy, longevity, health, and performance. And when you're basically addressing things across all 4 of these circles, you're now developing an exponential response to an exponential problem. And this becomes our exponential strategy. So one of the things that I've discovered is that when you funnel in that science, you identify different levers that reside on these circles that need to be pulled or activated or actuated in order to get the responses that you're after. And when it comes to the circle of longevity, just because there are levers there, what we've come to understand is that we're just not going to go in and pull them all. There's actually a timing and a sequence. There's a frequency and an intensity and a duration with which they get pulled. It's actually very musical. And this is the concept behind playing the symphony of longevity, if you will. I'm a musician. I grew up I was born in 54, and the Beatles, showed up on Ed Sullivan in 1964 when I was 10 years old. It's like, Mom, I want to learn how to play the guitar. So she got me a guitar and got me some lessons, and I've been playing ever since. And it's something I really love and enjoy. It's such a good creative outlet, a good way to express emotion, etc. Right? But this is very musical also, how this gets played. And I want you to understand that it's not a binary black and white. Oh, you have this, we're going to do that. There's actually, you have to think about this as what are we going to do over time, and how do we cycle in and out of things to actually treat this effectively? Critical concept. So these circles are also interrelated this way. So we have the life energy circle, and I'll show you what's involved with that. But this is really the ring that binds them all. If you don't have a good life energy circle, you don't have this dialed in, we can throw all the biochemistry, all the technology, all the procedures in the world at somebody, and it's really not going to have an impact. And the other thing to understand is that when people get to a point in their life where they don't look like they want to, don't feel like they want to, and can't do what they want to, they have a fork in the road, right? They can either acquiesce and say, well, I guess I'm just getting older. I went to my doctor and, he did the test and he said, you know what? I'm just getting older. So I'm just getting older. And society's telling me I'm getting older. Everybody around me is getting older. We're just getting older. Or you can respond the other way and say, you know what? I don't like this. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to get healthy. So like me, people start to exercise. They eat better. They get a Fitbit. They get a Whoop. They get an Oura Ring. They do a sleep study. They do, they learn how to meditate. They lower stress. They work on their relationships, right? And they basically have a get healthy approach to getting back. But a get healthy approach is actually only a linear response to an exponential problem. You have to actually address all 4 of these circles to really win here. This is how we think and what we believe to be true. And the reason for that is that when you do get healthy, yes, you do have an impact on longevity, you do have an impact on performance, but everybody that learned to meditate, everybody that took supplements, everybody that started to exercise, everybody that ate better and slept better and tracked their stuff, they all got old and died, every single one. And so it clearly isn't an adequate response to those protein surges that are happening, particularly between 63 and 78. So up here, it's the drivers of aging that have to be addressed. And here it's performance, right? And this is so critical. I'm going to show you what's on this circle as we go through this. But without really addressing how people perform, they lose their capabilities, and the next thing you know, they're stumbling, they're falling, they're breaking a hip, they're doing whatever's happening, right? And that's terrible. So we do a lot of testing. We test and we send things really literally around the world. I know SpectraCell is sponsoring this basically, and I will tell you this, full disclosure and transparency, there's an honorarium that they've suggested for this talk, if you will, but I want to actually donate that to charity. And what I would like to do is I'd like for you, the listeners, to actually nominate charities that you think would be appropriate to receive it. I don't even know how much money it is, but it's something. And let's together tonight decide where we want to send this money. Okay. That being said, I have used SpectraCell since about 2012, and I really have learned a lot from that test. When I was first introduced to it, I didn't quite understand how to use it. After some training and going through some coaching, it's been a staple of ours ever since. We like it. We find that it fluctuates for people, particularly as they change their activity levels or their eating levels or whatever else they're doing. They're fasting, they're using the sauna now, they're exercising more, whatever. And so we use it on a regular basis to kind of update our thoughts about their micronutrients. But we do tons of testing, right? I would say SpectraCell represents, 1% of what we do. And we do lots of other things to try to get a handle on what's happening for people. And these are basically the 9 hallmarks of aging that most of you have seen. You're familiar with this paper, 2013, published, that outlined the 9 hallmarks of aging: genomic instability, telomere attrition, epigenetic alterations, loss of proteostasis, deregulated nutrient sensing, mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular senescence, stem cell exhaustion, and altered intracellular communication, which is essentially more inflammation. In 2022, there were 5 more added. Compromised autophagy is now standalone. Microbiome disturbance is now standalone and added. Altered mechanical properties of cells is now a hallmark. And messenger RNA splicing dysregulation is now a hallmark, as is inflammation itself as standalone. And in November, there was another one added, a 6th additional one, which has to do with increasing cellular size. So when we start to look at what are the processes that are driving these hallmarks, now we're starting to get at, and not completely, of course, but we're starting to get at what are the drivers of aging? What's actually driving this process for us? And this is where we focus a lot of our attention. So from the testing that we do, we basically describe what we call a mosaic of ages for people. And I find that people will come to me and say, well, I had my biological age test. Yeah, I'm whatever age I am, but I had my biological age tested and I was, 5 years younger. And actually I'm quite good. And I say, really? That's interesting. You had your biological age tested. Because in actual fact, I think there's a lot of misinformation that we have one biological age. We actually have a mosaic of biological ages. We're looking at over 60 biological ages right now. And those are expanding rapidly, and I'll show you the manner in which we're doing that. But I think it's really important for people to understand that you are only as young as your oldest age. So your DNA methylation age is 4 years younger, but your vascular age and your cardiac age is 20 years older, right? So where's the problem? I mean, I think we really do people a disservice if we give them one biological age and try to tell them that this is what it is. So I would encourage you to rethink that if that's your approach, or if they come in with that thought process, that you try to coach them away from that, and maybe you are already, into the fact that no, you are really a mosaic of ages, if you will. So let's look at this life energy circle for a second, because this is the ring that binds them all. So a growth mindset is critical. My definition of a growth mindset is basically, are you married to your questions or are you married to your answers? If you're married to your answers, then you don't have a growth mindset. If you're married to your questions, you do have a growth mindset. And I find that our best clients are the ones that are asking the same questions that we are. And that's probably true for you in your practice too. If you're focused on a particular area and you're asking these questions and your clients come in and they're asking those same questions, those are your best clients. So think about, again, the questions that you're asking and the ones that you want to ask. Optimizing mental health, right? Massive. How much anxiety, depression, addiction, PTSD, ADD, ADHD do people have that leads to self-sabotaging behavior? right? And this is where you can throw all the biochemistry and all the technology in the world at somebody, but if they have self-sabotaging behavior, it's not going to work. I find that many people don't feel loved. Fundamentally, they don't feel loved. They beat themselves up all the time. They're so hard on themselves, and they don't fundamentally feel loved. And this is critical for people to, I think, thrive and survive and win at life, is actually feeling profoundly loved. And I think, none of us, all of us have run a gauntlet, right? All of us, I've never met a person that hasn't run a gauntlet through their childhood, their upbringing, things like that. We've all run a gauntlet. And at the end of the day, nobody had parents that actually gave them the unconditional love that they really deserved, right? And yet that's our birthright, is to be loved unconditionally. And so we end up having to give that to ourselves. We end up having to scoop up our little 3-year-old selves and give them that unconditional love, that celebration, that encouragement, etc., that your parents weren't able to give them, right? Or you. So this is critical. So we talk about this with people. And I will tell you, I go through this with CEOs and people that own, multi-$100 million companies, and this resonates with them so strongly. And then optimizing relational health is super important. So what comprises a good relationship? In my experience, in my meditative experience, I had an experience where I was meditating. I got up one night, I couldn't sleep. I got up and meditated, and I had this experience where all of a sudden I was sitting in a space where across a river, the river was just love flowing through everything. Across there was an entity, a being that I just had this incredible sense of knowing and being known and loving and being loved. It was such a connection. And that actually became my definition of heaven. And I think relationships are really at their best when we are known and we know and we love and we love. And so that's kind of become that's my North Star for relationships. And I try to help people understand that. And the other thing is forgiveness inside of relationships is another thing that comes up. And my concept of forgiveness is that, when you have, positive regard for another person, there's no barrier to the flow of good energy, right? But when something happens, all of a sudden we raise a barrier. It's like, oh no, I'm not going to send energy to that person, my ex-partner, my ex-wife, my ex-girlfriend, boyfriend, whoever it was. And yet, holding that energy takes a toll on us. Holding that barrier up takes a toll on us energetically. So forgiveness to me is when I decide, I'm just going to let that barrier down. And I'm going to let unconditional positive regard flow to that person. And if there's anything coming back, I'll receive it. But I'm not going to hold this barrier up. And that has become my definition of forgiveness. And then the other thing that I've realized is that language is actually a very poor form of communication. So you're probably scratching your head. Well, language is a poor form of communication. Well, think about this for just a second. The problem is always communication, right? And if we could actually really communicate, if we could communicate telepathically, let's say, if I could download for you and you could get from me and vice versa, your questions were coming in and we could really download, right, back and forth, that would be communication. We're dribbling out words. I'm trying to paint a picture in your minds of what it is I'm experiencing here. And when you are trying to talk to somebody else, you're dribbling out words to try to paint a picture of what's going on inside of you. So it's really a very limited, it's good, it's functional, but it's a very limited way in which we communicate. And so when you realize that, all of a sudden you have tremendous empathy for the process and the other person. And when they say something, it's like, oh, well, tell me more about that, because I'm sure there's more behind that than what I understand. And it leads to all this active listening, which is really, really helpful. So these are just some of the things that I approach with my clients. And then feeling joy, this has become my North Star. If I'm not feeling joy doing something, then I probably shouldn't be doing it. Or there's something I'm bringing to it that's not enabling me to feel joy. And then optimizing spiritual health. For me, this is very important, being connected to something greater, something bigger, a spiritual reality. It comes to me through meditation, etc. We won't go into all the details of it, but I think this is incredibly important to people, and I find that many people resonate with this. I find that many people don't feel worthy. For whatever reason, they don't feel worthy. Messaging they got coming through life, and this really holds people back. And we've all heard a million times that, we're the thing that holds ourselves back more than anything else. But this is a piece of that. And then optimizing wisdom. How do we make good decisions for ourselves, for other people, for our communities, our families, the planet. And I find that when we make really wise decisions, that stress levels go down, we feel better, and it's really has an impact on health. And then this is one that's really, really important. So we all deal with stress, right? And some people deal with anxiety with stress, and then there's depression, and then there's, worry, and then there's, whatever, or there's fear, right? We talk about, well, if I just can conquer my fears. Well, the way I think about this is when you go to what's the root cause of all those things, they all devolve down to not feeling safe, right? Somebody cuts you off on the road and it's like, oh, you didn't feel safe, right? The stock market's doing something, you don't feel safe, right? Somebody did something, you don't feel safe. And so if you start to understand that it's all about feeling safe, it gives you a new perspective on how to cope with these things. And I teach my patients and clients as well to give them a new way to cope with it. And the other interesting thing is that there's nothing external to us that can ever make us feel safe, right? No amount of money, doesn't matter where you went to school, doesn't matter who your family is, doesn't matter where you grew up, doesn't matter what you believe. There's nothing outside of you that can actually fundamentally make you feel safe. Well, I'll take back what you believe. I do think what you believe can make you feel safe. Just like you have to give yourself love, you have to give yourself safety too. And what you believe can actually factor into that, for sure. So this is really, really important. And then this feeling energetic resonance with the universe, I call it, this greater sense of purpose. When people have a sense of purpose, all of a sudden, so many things come into a line, particularly when they're serving other people, right? When it's not all about them. And so this is the mosaic of life energy that we go in. And we can go through and grade these for people. We give them quote unquote ages that we describe in terms of maturation ages, if you will. And then we have the mosaic of longevity ages, right? What's your telomeric age? What's the status of your mitochondria and mitophagy, right? And how do you measure mitophagy? We're using proteostasis and autophagy, cross-linking and glycation, right? Oncogenic potential, DNA repair. What's the status for your gut microbiome? What's your epigenetic rate of aging? We use True Age for this. You probably do too, the Dunin Pace test. And then intrinsic and extrinsic epigenetic age, nutrient sensing, this balance of mTOR and AMPK. This is part of the cycling. And I find that biology is really an economy of balance. Biology doesn't like to be pushed in the corner. It doesn't like to be keto all the time. It doesn't want to be fed all the time. It doesn't want to be stressed all the time in this way. It likes to cycle. It likes to recover. It likes to go through these cycles. And mTOR and AMPK, it wants to be anabolic, but then it wants to be catabolic, and it wants to, increase autophagy and the things that go along with that. So this cycling elements of this are a great part of playing the symphony of longevity. And then we also can look at inflammation levels. We have many cytokines we can measure, et cetera, NAD, NADH, we go after that in a big way. And we're also now using transcriptomics and proteomics. We're developing testing to decode aging. We're looking at macromolecular damage. We don't have a great test for this currently. Alternate intracellular communication, we are looking at this with the transcriptomics and proteomics, making our first attempts at that. Cellular mechanical properties, I don't have a great test for this. Stem cell function, we have amazing stem cell technology, which we won't go into tonight, but we're looking at markers for stem cell now. And then senescent cell burden, we can measure. We're getting better at this all the time, and the secretory status of the senescent cells. And then messenger RNA splicing dysregulation, we're looking with the transcriptomics to see if we can understand this better. And then the immune system. So we can go through and get lots of ages for people when it comes to longevity. And then health, all the different systems, right, that we go through. I'm not going to spend time on this. This is all old hat to you guys, right? But it's basically heart, lungs. It's everything you can think of. And then performance, I think this is really often overlooked. So in my practice, my definition of being fit is being fast, agile, strong, quick, balanced, with great resilience, great flexibility. So we measure agility, resilience, hand grip strength, quickness, static balance, dynamic balance, HRV and recovery, flexibility, cardiovascular endurance, neuromuscular reaction times we measure, and speed. And I see I'm getting a little short on time. And out of that, we prescribe a lot of actions. We have feedback loops and follow-up testing. And so this is our Life Energy Resilience Anti-Fragility trial, the Life Raft trial. And in this, we're dealing with all four circles, but now we're bringing in other technologies, plasmapheresis, young plasma. We have a telomerase product that we're the only ones on the planet that have currently that will re-lengthen telomeres, and I'll show you that in a way that I've never seen anything else do it. We use an activated PRP to activate very small embryonic-like stem cells that, when we do this in concert with other things, become quite phenomenal. We balance mTOR and AMPK. We use senolytics and xenomorphics, sirtuin activation, on and on. But this is part of playing the symphony. And this is me doing plasmapheresis with young plasma. I've now done it 3 times. I can tell you that it's become amazing. The first time it wasn't all that dramatic for me. The second time it was a game changer. And the third time also. And I can tell you that when people are suffering from long haul COVID, or they just had the flu, or et cetera, they're aging more. We found that people that get the vaccine have a decrease in their VO2 max. We measure VO2 max for everybody. People that get COVID have a decrease in VO2 max. These were my telomeres, and I'll end with this. This was in 2020, pre-COVID. I was about 5 years younger than my chronological age. After COVID, I'm in the 29th percentile. Now I'm 5 years older than my chronological age. And then after using the telomerase product, I'm here, which would put me in about the 80th percentile, 75th to 80th percentile for a 30-year-old, right? Which is where I want to be. And 6 months later, I measured it. I'm about to get it measured again this week, actually. So these are the kind of things that we can do. And then we have people that want to come and just work on a particular problem with us. We'll entertain that for them too. And the symphony of longevity is here. It leads to balance, adaptability, rejuvenation. It's all built on an exponential mindset. Are you asking the right questions? And that leads to resilience and robustness, which are actually 2 different things, but they're both critically important. So I'll stop there and take some questions. I think I ran over a little bit. A couple minutes. Okay.
That's okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Gladden. This has been amazing. We do have a question here from Zhang. Can the shortened telomeres be lengthened with nutrition, herbal, and lifestyle in seniors over 70 years old?
Well, this is a really interesting concept, right? So when people come to us and say, make me better, make me younger, I want to be younger, I want to be better. We always talk about what we should be adding or what we should be doing, but actually our approach has become, what should we take away? Because we find that many people are sabotaging their telomeres with what they're doing. They're sleeping, they're under tremendous stress, they're all these things that are actually shortening their telomeres. So the first thing we do is try to figure out what's actually damaging the biology, and then we come back to rejuvenate the biology. And I think it's really important to take it in that order, because otherwise your therapies are not going to work. When you talk about lengthening telomeres in older people, what we've found, and we've used TA65 and isogenus and TAM818, and we've used all that stuff for years. What we saw routinely was that it was the short telomeres that were preferentially lengthened. And I'll tell you, we do our studies through life length. I know SpectraCell does telomeres too, but we like life length because we can use research protocols and we get more information about the telomeres, and we get to look at what are the short telomeres. And if you're not into the research, maybe the SpectraCell is a good solution for you. But for us, we like to do that. And we saw repeatedly, it's the short telomeres that selectively get re-lengthened, which is actually helpful because you don't want to be over-lengthening telomeres either. With the new product, what I found was that my short telomeres, again, were preferentially lengthened. And I went from maybe 4 kilobases up to 7.4 kilobases, or maybe it was 3.8 to 7.4. I mean, it was so dramatic. It was really impressive. So the answer is yes, telomeres can be lengthened at any age. It does take a concerted approach, though, of removing the damage and then putting in the things that can be helpful. So, and the telomerase product that we're using currently is in an IRB approved trial on its own. That's why it's not widely available just yet, but we're working with that.
Thanks. One more question. How do you guide patients to navigate this landscape with all the aging chemicals and endocrine disruptors in the environment and the foods they eat?
Yeah. Well, we live in a toxic environment. There's no 2 ways about it, right? And so we have really started to get much more aggressive in the last couple of years of home testing, right? Where we test their water, we test their air, we test, all the different things that are going on to try. And then we coach them away from, toxic materials and stuff like that. Sorry, my cleaning people just left. I didn't know they were coming in. Yeah, I didn't know they cleaned at this time of night, but here we are. Anyway, trying to clean up the environment, I think, is very important, and making people aware of that. Again, it's what can you take out before you start to put things in. But I find that people can only do so much, right? And so you have to really have a plan of, we're going to start here. We're going to get this under control. It's kind of like learning to play baseball, or let's say you're going to learn how to play golf. Let's get you to where you get the basics of the swing. Then we'll worry about moving on to the next club and the next club. So it's kind of like that too with this. It's really an education. People are really signing up. It's kind of like going to college. I tell them, right? You're going to spend a year with us. It's going to be like a year in college. So.
One more question. We have Melvin asking, do you teach practitioners?
That's a really interesting question. I've been giving quite a few talks. I've been working diligently on the book, and the book will come out, as I mentioned here, this spring is my anticipation. When it comes out, it's an interesting book. A lot of what I told you is in the book, but then I'm able to go into a lot of other things that I didn't have time to tell you tonight or share with you tonight. And I think when I go give talks at different conferences, practitioners come up to me and want to know more about how we're doing stuff. And I think that I've been so focused on what we're doing, right? I want to go to Mars. The way I look at it is that nobody's ever gone to Mars before. And if we can go to Mars, we can then start to democratize what it might look like to do that. I'm so focused on making 100 the new 30 that's where all my energy is. And once we can do that, then yes, let's democratize it. But I also see that there's really a need to start to train other practitioners. And I had this brought up to me not long ago at a conference I was at in San Diego. And actually, it came to mind for myself, and I was bouncing it off some other people who agreed. So I think we will get to a point where we do start to teach this, actually, and we'll have courses that people can sign up for and that kind of stuff, and we can walk you through things. I have given you just such a surface taste of what we do and the way we think. I mean, it's almost barely enough to get a sense of it, because we've been developing this in earnest, and because we're only married to the questions, we just keep going. We never stop. We just keep going. So I think, yes, we will be teaching it in the future.
That's great. That's good to hear as well, because all of this information is great for providers to learn a little bit more.
Absolutely. And that's what we want. We want everybody to be doing this, right? Thinking, and you'll have your own take on everything, of course, but if we can help more people have a bigger impact on their clients, then that's my passion. So
great. Well, at this time, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Gladden. This has been great, and I know a lot of people will have more questions, but we'll let you guys know that this webinar it is recorded and will be placed on our YouTube channel, where we will have links to Gladden Longevity's website, to Gladden Longevity's podcast, to the link for the PPT download as well, and that way they can get a little bit more information. And if they want to contact you directly, they'll do it through those ways.
Yep. Yeah. And the podcast, we've been doing the podcast for quite some time. It started off, it was called Living Beyond 120. And then we moved it over to the Gladden Longevity podcast. And I think it's about to change again into Age Hackers.
Okay.
But anyway, if you just go to the Gladden Longevity Podcast, you'll have access to everything that's there. Just go to gladdenlongevitypodcast.com. And I don't know how many episodes we have. It's pushing 200 now, I think. So there's a lot of really great information, a lot of great interviews with really interesting people. So.
And well, thank you very much. Everybody have a good night. And at this time, we'll finish up the webinar.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.